Hello, my name is Melanie Jacobs, for those of you I've not met, and I have the tremendous honor and privilege of serving as the Dean at the Louis D. Brandeis School of Law at the University of Louisville. And I am so delighted to welcome you on behalf of our faculty and our staff and our university administration. Thank you for being here tonight. We have several judges in the audience. Thank you to the members of the bench who are here. Thank you to the members of the bar. Thank you to President Bradley for being here and supporting this event. I'm really grateful. Quite a number of members of the Brandeis faculty and staff, so I really appreciate that you took the time and that you're here, and of course to our amazing students. I also do want to acknowledge and thank Ms. Tamika Palmer, Breonna Taylor's mother, who is here with us. She has been with us each year. And it really means a lot that you're here and that you support the event, so thank you so much. 5 years ago, Breonna Taylor was killed by police officers who were serving a no-knock warrant at her home. And about 18 months later, artist Amy Sherald, who painted that very famous portrait of Breonna, who looked absolutely beautiful in her beautiful blue dress, kindly provided funding to the law school to award up to 3 law school fellowships that, according to the gift agreement, will enable students to perform otherwise unpaid legal work with social justice-oriented nonprofit organizations and agencies. You'll hear more in a few minutes about the history of the lecture, but I am very proud of Brandeis Law for having this lecture each year and for honoring Ms. Taylor's legacy in this way. This is a challenging time in America and a challenging time in higher education. My hope is that through this series and in awarding the fellowships, we're recommitting ourselves to building a better world. Now, that sounds pretty Pollyanna, and I know if my son were here, he would roll his eyes. He's 14, I should clarify that. But maybe you're thinking even if he were 34, he'd roll his eyes. But it is what I believe and it is how I feel, especially as law students and lawyers and judges. We are the ones with the tools to make this a better world and to make this a better society. And so I'm so happy that you're here and that you're part of this event. This is a time in which we are changing our discussion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know that dismantling DEI offices and programs and not using the word diversity is incredibly painful for a lot of people, and that it really creates grief. I do also understand that as a white woman, I cannot appreciate the full extent of that grief. But here are the things that I think I can understand and what I do believe and why I think it's so important that we're here. I believe that differences make us stronger across all ideologies, across all religions, across all demographics. At Brandeis Law, for example, we have the Human Rights Advocacy Program, we have the Resilience Justice Program, and we have the Ordered Liberty Program. They could not be more different from ideological perspectives. But our tent is big, and that is the point. We have student groups with different ideologies. We have student groups who, despite differing political viewpoints, have intentionally come together to discuss issues and try to better understand each other's point of view, which is what I think law schools absolutely should be doing. So, standing here, Brandeis Law is committed to our values, to fostering inclusivity among all identities and ideologies. As lawyers, we're taught to see 2 sides of an issue. We're taught to make arguments in the alternative. We know better than anyone else that there are many, 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 many shades of gray. And I believe that our discussions are enriched by our differences and by the different perspectives we bring. So this is my third year speaking at the lecture. It's our fourth lecture, but my third time as dean. And this will be the third year that I will say that ensuring the ideals of equality, equity, justice, and dignity for all people should not be divisive. Rather, it should be our common societal goal. Ensuring the ideals of equality, justice, and dignity for all people should transcend politics and partisan divisions. So thank you so much to Professor Daniel Harawa for joining us and sharing your thoughts on how to achieve that very important goal. I do want to thank my colleague, Professor Lanita Baker, who is a former Darrell T. Owens Award winner, for helping to organize tonight's event. Joe Wiegand for his amazing help with all of the communications and the program, and I'm pointing to him, he's sitting in the back, along with Stephen Durham, who is recording our program this evening. Thank you, Tracy Cole, for making sure that we have delicious treats at the conclusion of our program. A very special welcome back to my former colleague, but my friend, Professor Cedric Merlin Powell. Thank you for helping to organize this event. You continue to have extraordinary impact as a teacher and as a scholar, as a colleague and a friend to us. I saw everyone running over to give you hugs, as they should. And of course, to our very first lecturer, speaker, keynote speaker at our first Breonna Taylor lecture, my colleague at Brandeis Law, Dr. Laura McNeil. Dr. McNeil is one of two inaugural Scholars of the Year that we had this year. She's also the third organizer of the event, and this is one of my first public opportunities to announce her as the Harder Chair in Law. She has an endowed chair, so that is very well deserved, very well deserved. Professor McNeil has both a JD and a PhD, so for law students who think, oh my God, 3 years of law school, just think of all that extra punishment. But a JD and a PhD in education, and she is a national expert in issues of access and equity in employment and education law, with particular emphasis on issues of access and equity for individuals from traditionally marginalized populations. And of course, you may recognize Professor McNeil from TV like CNN, MSNBC, CBS, NBC, among others. She's published extensively on the intersection of bias in the law and conducts anti-bias workshops for educators, students, lawyers, judges, nonprofit organizations, and various other sectors. She has received multiple awards. As I mentioned, she is our new Harder Chair. And as I also said, she gave the inaugural Breonna Taylor lecture, so it has been so lovely for her to help us organize this very important event each year. She'll give you a little bit more information about the history of the lecture. And let me introduce Dr. Laura McNeil.
So I want to apologize ahead of time. You're going to have to excuse my enthusiasm. This is the highlight of my year. It is an honor and a privilege to welcome you to our annual Breonna Taylor Lecture on behalf of the two other organizers that helped make this possible, planners, and that would be Professor Cedric Merlin Powell, who's somewhere there, and Professor Lanita Baker. I call this the Dream Team. But I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the Dream Team has some other key players. Think of again, basketball analogy, and that would be the two gentlemen in the back, Joe and Stephen. Thank you so much. Tracy Cole, who's on the outside. And, I often remind myself when we are organizing events like this that it truly takes a village, and I'm grateful for that village. And so I'm excited about the theme this year. I think it's so timely and important. Saving our democracy, empowering change through activism. Tonight we gather in remembrance, in reflection, and in action. We honor the life and legacy of Breonna Taylor, a daughter, a young woman whose life was taken far too soon. Her name has become a rallying cry for justice, for equity, for the urgent need for deep, substantive reform within our criminal legal system. This lecture is not only a moment to remember Breonna's life, but a call to continue the work that her story compels us to do, to challenge unjust systems, to amplify marginalized voices, and to reimagine justice in a way that centers community, care, and accountability. Tonight, we celebrate impact, the impact of Breonna Taylor's story that it's had on the global movement, and the impact that we can all have as we commit ourselves to change. As we listen today, as we lean into this collective conversation, hear from the expertise of our esteemed guest speaker, I encourage you to carry forward the spirit of determination and hope that fuels this cause. As the writer Marian Wright Edelman once said, service is the rent we pay for being. It is the very purpose of life, not just something you do in your spare time. Let us move forward with purpose, committed not only to remembering and building a world where justice is not an exception, but the rule. I want to say, with respect to this lecture, when I say the importance of honoring Breonna Taylor's lecture, you're going to hear tonight from the fellows that we've selected for this year. And these fellows are absolutely amazing. They're incredible. They are an extension of Breonna Taylor's lecture. And it's an honor for us to be able to work with them. And I hope you're as excited as I am to meet our fellows tonight as well. And so without further ado, because I know you all didn't come here to hear me speak, Professor Powell is going to come up and introduce our esteemed speaker for the day. So if you can give Professor Powell a round of applause, appreciate that.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be back. It's great to be back home, my second home. And I'm not an outsider causing trouble. I'm a member of this community with 35 years of experience and close connections to all of my colleagues here at the law school and in the University of Louisville community. When I was thinking about my remarks today, I thought about several questions we could ask. And I'm sure that Professor Harara will be covering some of these questions in his discussion of constitutional law and criminal procedure. Many years ago, we had a Ku Klux Klan rally here on campus. Campus was in turmoil. And I was invited to speak on a panel, and it wasn't really a friendly panel because I had to defend the free speech, the First Amendment. And you know, as a scholar, one of my first law review articles was talking about how to regulate hate speech. Got some pushback on that. You can't regulate hate speech. This is the marketplace of ideas. Let all of the good ideas come forward. And I must say, this year has been really dichotomous to me and contradictory on some level because I'm teaching first years in Constitutional Law 1. And they look at me and they say, well, yeah, that's what the book says, but what is happening? And I'm standing there with a straight face and I give them all of the theories, but they're pushing, they're analyzing. And so we really have to work on viewpoint discrimination, content regulation. All of the lawyers in the room know that we apply strict scrutiny because even though we may not like the idea, we have to hear it. We're First Amendment absolutists. And we should practice the same practice when people are speaking politically. You may not like it, but it's something that has to be heard. That's what gives democracy the light of day. So here are 5 questions that I think we have to ask. And these are questions that you can fill in the blanks to. These are questions that you can moderate. These are questions that you can critically engage. But you have to ask yourself, 1, is this state of affairs normal? 2, what are we trying to protect? 3, can all of our democratic ideas be translated into reality in these times? 4, should we even be uncomfortable asking these questions? That is what the role of universities, colleges, institutions of thought are for. Questioning conformity, making sure we take a critical perspective, We can't change the past, we can't see the future, but we are in the now, and it's time for us to embrace where we are. So how do we embrace the common good? We have to give ourselves a chance to explore these issues while maintaining our common identity as a community of learning, a community of acceptance, a community of inclusion. I had the privilege and honor of introducing Daniel Harara, who's not only a preeminent scholar, a superstar, but a friend. He is professor of clinical law and director of the Federal Appellate Clinic. He is a prolific, engaged, and active scholar. His work has appeared in the Harvard Law Review, Harvard Law Journal Forum, California Law Review, Georgetown Law Journal, and I'm leaving out a number of others. His article, just written 3 years ago, is now a classic in the field. It's called Lemonade, a racial justice reframing of the Roberts Court's criminal jurisprudence. Is really a constitutional, a canonical work. Everyone talks about it. He is a true clinician, scholar, movement lawyer, friend. Please join me in welcoming Daniel Harara to the podium, who will be speaking about saving our democracy, empowering through activism.
Good evening. So I just needed to start with thanking the University of Louisville, President Bradley, Dean Jacobs, Professor Powell, Professor McNeil, Professor Baker, for the honor of being here. I'm truly not deserving to be at a lecture formed in the radiant Breonna Taylor's name. And I want to show my appreciation for everyone who made this night possible. I know it does take a village. My heart is really full right now, and not only because of this generous invitation, but because I'm in a room filled with people who care about justice, who are open to having the hard conversations, and who believe and will work to ensure that the law serves all people and not just a privileged few. Now, I'm sure you all can relate to how lonely the world can feel at times right about now. And knowing that I'm part of a community like the one here tonight, this evening, gives me the energy that I need to keep up the fight. I'm especially humbled to be standing before the indomitable Miss Tamika Palmer. Miss Palmer, I am so grateful for your modeling us for us all how to fight no matter how dark the day. If there were ever a time we needed your lessons by example, your unflinching grace, your perseverance, your leadership, it's right now. You are a tenacious warrior for justice. You turned an unspeakable personal tragedy into a call to action for us all. And I truly hope and pray that we can all follow in your light at a time where the fight is more pressing than ever before. So we're here today not just to talk about legal theory or constitutional doctrine in the abstract. We're here because law shapes lives. And in the United States, it has perpetually shaped them unequally. In particular, Supreme Court doctrine has played a powerful role in enabling and then entrenching the racial biases that affect all facets of life, including, and as most relevant here, policing practices and the criminal justice system. Now, today I want to talk about the ways in which Supreme Court rulings and the way lawyers have chosen to litigate cases have contributed to racially violent policing. How these legal and litigation decisions have legitimized discriminatory practices, and what we must do legally, politically, and morally to chart a different course. But before we turn to the courts and the legal profession, we need to take a moment to recognize the climate that we're in, because it truly affects everything, including sometimes our ability to hope and to dream. We're living through a moment where the federal government, and I'm sorry I'm about to get somebody in trouble, formed in all of our names, is not just turning away from racial equity, it's actively working to erase the histories and reaffirm the structures of racism that define so much of our legal and social landscape. We're seeing an attempt to rewrite the story of America, one in which race no longer matters, racism, to the extent it ever existed, is somehow in the past, and that talking about racism, whether past or present, is somehow a form of division. But worse than that, we're seeing attempts to roll back progress and reinforce a racial hierarchy, a caste system where Black people will always be at the bottom. They're attempting to portray every Black and brown person as not only undeserving, but as dangerous. This isn't about neutrality. It's not even about invisibility. It's about subjugation. We're seeing efforts to ban books that teach about slavery and Jim Crow so that it's easier to reestablish an apartheid state. We're seeing efforts to limit what schools can say about segregation, redlining, police violence, in an attempt to keep us ignorant of the widespread and pervasive practices that prevent people from flourishing equally. Across the country, policymakers are not just ignoring race, they're punishing those who try to speak about it honestly. They're cracking down on those who are working mightily to make America live up to her promise. All of this makes the work of racial justice, makes this night more urgent than ever before. Because there are those who would not want us to gather here together this evening, who would balk at the idea of us discussing structural inequality. But as long as we have breath, we must commit and then recommit to being truth tellers, as holding up a mirror to show America who she is, and then fighting to make her better than before. Because if we can't name the problem, we can't fix it. And if we let this moment pass without resistance, we risk letting the law continue to operate unabated, not as a tool of progress, but as one of oppression. That's why today's conversation matters. Because even as some people push to erase the history and present-day reality of racism, the law, and especially the courts, remain central to the story. And while we can critically reflect on how this story has been written thus far, we all have power to shape how this story goes from here. And to do that, we need to understand how Supreme Court doctrine and the lawyers that wield and shape it have helped build the system of racially biased policing we find ourselves in today. And we need to talk about what we can do to dismantle it, even in the face of retrenchment. And so while today I'll focus on the Supreme Court's Fourth Amendment doctrine, given its direct link to policing, just know that the Supreme Court's jurisprudence that enables racial bias to flourish across American life extends far beyond the Fourth Amendment context. So with that, let's talk about the Fourth Amendment a little bit. On Inauguration Day, the president said that the United States should be a country that is colorblind and merit-based. But policing in the United States is not colorblind, and it never has been. From slave patrols to stop and frisk, American law enforcement has been used to control and contain Black and brown communities. And while we like to think of courts as a check on governmental power, as the guardian of rights, they have often been the opposite. In fact, the Supreme Court has issued a long line of decisions that shield police from accountability and insulate racially biased practices from any meaningful scrutiny. And so there are a few Fourth Amendment decisions that I think are critical to understand from the Supreme Court that have allowed for racially biased policing. You see, the Fourth Amendment is supposed to protect us all from unreasonable searches and seizures. But in practice, the scope of one's Fourth Amendment rights is highly race-dependent, in part due to the Supreme Court's policing jurisprudence of the past few decades. So it's hard to start the story of modern racialized policing without first discussing the Supreme Court's decision in Terry versus Ohio. Often considered the founding of modern policing jurisprudence, that 1968 decision upheld the constitutionality of the infamous tactic of stop and frisk. Terry involved a police officer, Officer McFadden, standing on a street corner in Cleveland one day, and he saw two black men walk in front of a jewelry store. Now, to Officer McFadden, this looked suspicious, like maybe they were casing the store to rob it. So he approached the two men, he asked them a few questions, and then, without a warrant or any evidence of any crime, he grabbed one of the men, spun him around, and patted him down. Now, Officer McFadden felt a gun in one of the men's coats. He reached inside, took it out. That man was Mr. Terry, and Mr. Terry was eventually arrested, prosecuted, and convicted of unlawful gun possession. Now, Mr. Terry argued that this search was unconstitutional, that police can't just stop you and search you without a warrant or probable cause. I mean, it's right there in the Constitution. That's what the Constitution demands. But the Supreme Court disagreed. The court held that Officer McFadden did not need probable cause or a warrant to engage Mr. Terry. Instead, the Supreme Court said to stop and frisk Mr. Terry, reasonable suspicion was enough. Now, on its face, that might sound practical, but in practice, reasonable suspicion has provided cover for widespread infringement on Black and brown people's autonomy and bodily integrity. Terry constitutionalized a standard of policing that has disproportionately been used by police to police communities of color. Because what counts as reasonable is deeply shaped by personal intuition. And the courts bend over backwards to defer to police officers' claims of suspicion. Now, because of Terry, officers rely on vague behavioral cues like nervousness or furtive gestures, terms that are highly subjective and racially coded, to justify their reasonable suspicion. And the Supreme Court has consistently refused to consider or even acknowledge the racial impact of this decision and how, in practice, it leads to people of color walking the world with less constitutional cover than others. Now, turning from stop and frisk, let's think about another problem, racial profiling. Fast forwarding a few decades to 1996, in Wren versus United States, two plainclothes police officers were patrolling a neighborhood in Washington, D.C. that was supposedly known for its drug activity. The officers spotted a car with two young Black men in it at a stop sign. Now, according to the officers, the car was stopped at the stop sign for just a little too long before it made a turn without using the turn signal. The officers pulled the car over for the traffic violation, stopping for too long at a stop sign, and the failure to use a traffic signal. But once they stopped the car, they looked inside and discovered drugs. The men were arrested and prosecuted for drug possession, and in court, they argued that the traffic violations were not the real reason the police pulled them over that day, that the officers were fishing for other evidence of other crimes. But the Supreme Court held that this doesn't matter, that as long as an officer has an objectively legal basis for a stop, it doesn't matter what the officer's actual motivations were, even if the motivations were racial. In other words, if a police officer claims that they pulled someone over for a broken taillight or from the air freshener hanging from your rearview mirror, courts don't have to care, as a constitutional matter, if the real reason that they pulled you over was because of your race. Now, this ruling opened the floodgates for pretextual policing. Police now have the power to stop people for the most minor infractions to investigate other unrelated suspicions. And because minor infractions are so ubiquitous, I'm actually willing to bet money that we've all committed at least one today. The Supreme Court gave police officers virtually unlimited discretion to engage you. Discretion that study after study shows is used and exercised in racially discriminatory ways. The Wren decision explicitly ignored the possibility of racial bias in policing. The court said that the Fourth Amendment doesn't care about intent, but in the real world, race and intent matter deeply. And again, this decision provides yet another example of how one's race determines how much protection the Constitution will provide. Or take another case from the turn of the millennium, Illinois versus Wardlow. Around lunchtime one September day, a 4-car police caravan carrying 8 Chicago police officers descended on a high-crime neighborhood on the west side of Chicago. Now, this group of officers was investigating drug transactions because this neighborhood was known for its heavy narcotics trafficking, according to the police. Now, remember, at this time, the Chicago PD had a notorious reputation for its violence, including literally running an actual torture ring. So when Sam Wardlow saw this caravan descend down the street, he took off running. 2 officers turned their car around and cornered Mr. Wardlow in an alley. One of the officers got out of the car and immediately searched Mr. Wardlow for weapons, because in his experience, it's common for there to be weapons in areas where there's narcotic trafficking. Finding nothing on Mr. Wardlow's person, the officer then decided to search the bag Mr. Wardlow was holding, and eventually they found a gun in his bag that Mr. Wardlow said he had for self-defense, but because he didn't have a license, he was arrested, prosecuted, and convicted for unlawful gun possession. Now, Mr. Wardlow argued that the officers violated his Fourth Amendment rights because they didn't even have reasonable suspicion to believe that he committed a crime when they stopped and searched him. Remember, all that they knew was that he ran when he saw the police and that he was in a certain neighborhood. But the Supreme Court disagreed with Mr. Wardlow and held that his flight, plus the fact that he was in a high-crime neighborhood, was enough to justify stopping him. In reaching this decision, the court never paused to ask, why would a black man run when he sees the police? The court never considered the deep-rooted fear that black and brown communities might have of law enforcement, a fear that feels especially reasonable today as we are watching law enforcement snatch people off the streets in broad daylight. Instead, the court's ruling turned Mr. Wardlow's fear into suspicion. The ruling had the effect of criminalizing self-preservation. Let's take one more case from 2002, United States versus Drayton. In that case, 2 black men were sitting in the back of a Greyhound bus when 3 police officers boarded the bus while it was on a pit stop. The officers were conducting a drug sweep. That involved one of the officers standing at the door of the bus so nobody could leave, while the other 2 officers walked down the bus aisle, stopping to talk to anybody who they deemed suspicious. Now, the officers eventually got to Mr. Drayton and Mr. Brown, the 2 defendants in this case, and the officers asked them questions and then requested to search both their bags and their bodies. Neither man was told they could say no to the officer's request. Now, the officers claimed the men agreed to the search, and during the pat-down, they found drugs strapped to one of the men's legs near his groin. Now, the 2 men argued in court that their consent wasn't truly voluntary, because with officers standing over you, blocking the exit, with their guns and their handcuffs showing, nobody would think you could actually refuse their requests. But again, the Supreme Court disagreed. The court said the 2 men were not seized under the Fourth Amendment and that their consent was voluntary. And again, the racial dynamics, the power imbalance, the lived reality were absent from the court's reasoning. The court ignored the coercive context that these men found themselves in, including the fact that Black people are often taught to comply with police from the youngest of ages as a means of survival. When Black people and other people of color consent to police interaction, that consent often isn't given freely in any sense of the word. It's given out of necessity. But the court didn't seem to care about that. Now, add on top of all this the doctrine of qualified immunity. So even when police violate people's constitutional rights, they escape accountability thanks to this judge-made rule that protects police officers from civil liability unless their conduct violated clearly established law. Now, in practice, this means that if there's no nearly identical case on the books, an officer will usually be immune, even if a court finds that their conduct was unconstitutional. Qualified immunity is a huge barrier for victims of police abuses and excesses, and people of color often don't report police misconduct. But even when they do report it, the law provides little remedy or recourse. Now, perhaps the most profound problem across all of these cases is that the court refuses to acknowledge that race is legally relevant. In each of the cases we just discussed, race was a central part of the context, yet the Supreme Court rendered race invisible. Race, racial bias, racism features nowhere in the court's decision-making. So what does this all mean in practice? It means that Black drivers are disproportionately stopped, searched, and arrested, even they're not statistically more likely to have contraband than anyone else. It means that neighborhoods with large Latino populations are surveilled under the guise of migrant or immigration enforcement, with tactics that amount to dragnet policing. It means that indigenous communities are over-policed and under-protected, especially in rural areas with overlapping jurisdictional confusing. It means that entire communities have learned that the law does not protect them, it polices them. Again, legal doctrine isn't abstract. It determines who is stopped, who is searched, who is arrested, who is prosecuted, who is imprisoned, and for how long, and who police or the state might kill. It determines whose fears count as reasonable, the police officer's fear of a Black person, and whose fears are irrelevant, the Black person's fear of police. And through decisions like Terry and Wren, Wardlow and Drayton, the Supreme Court has systematically privileged the perspectives of police while ignoring the perspectives of the people who are most heavily policed. Now, to be clear, this failure isn't just the courts. Lawyers share a big part of the blame. And too often our conversation about policing and racial justice stop at the courtroom door. But we can't forget that behind every unjust precedent is a lawyer who argued for it, a judge who rationalized it, a law school that taught it, and a system that normalized it. That's why when we talk about legal strategy, we can't confine our critique to the decision a court reaches. We must interrogate how that decision became possible. We have to ask who gets to tell stories in court, who is believed, and whose suffering is legible as a legal matter. Now, I want to say, I know that lawyers have been on the front line of fighting racial injustice. I'm proud to have been a lawyer at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, an organization that has led the fight for racial justice for decades. I'm proud to have been a public defender in the District of Columbia at an agency that is seen as the gold standard of what indigent defense can be. But even though lawyers have helped bend the arc of justice towards progress, sometimes, maybe oftentimes, lawyers intentionally or unintentionally have stood in the way. And we therefore have to reckon with the fact that litigation and the choices lawyers make, especially those choices made in response to conservative reactionary courts, have sometimes reinforced the very doctrines that progressive lawyers have been trying to dismantle. See, in many constitutional challenges, lawyers intentionally avoid making race central to their argument. In fact, if you read the briefing of all of the cases that we just discussed, you wouldn't even know that the defendants in each case were Black. Their race was entirely absent from the briefing in those cases. Now, why? Part of the reason I think is structural. Many public defenders are overworked, under-resourced, and often aren't from the backgrounds that their clients are from. So they may not see race as relevant, or they may not recognize the relevance of race to any given factual scenario, or even if they see and understand the relevance of race, they may worry that raising race will backfire and hurt their clients in the process. A lot of lawyers were trained in legal institutions that taught them to treat race as a third-rail topic to be avoided at all costs. Now, in a similar vein, civil rights lawyers know that racial justice victories can be hard to come by. Therefore, rather than singularly focusing on race, they often have to shift strategies. They argue about privacy rights. They focus on procedural flaws. They lean on the technicalities. And in choosing what cases to bring, impact litigators often aim for the perfect plaintiff, someone who's sympathetic, someone who hasn't committed a crime, someone who has been harmed in the most textbook of ways. But the reality about racism, racial bias, and racialized policing in particular is messy. It disproportionately affects people who are poor, who have records, who are dealing with mental illness or substance use issues. In other words, those who are most affected are often those who are most marginalized. And when the law can only speak for the few who can pass as ideal, it abandons the many of us who cannot. Now, over the years, lawyers have avoided raising race in favor of arguments that they think will resonate with the judges they find themselves in front of, because they know most judges will not have had the experience of being racially profiled. Most judges will not have had to give their children the talk, or will not have had the talk given to them. Most judges won't know what it's like to be stopped, searched, or surveilled because of the color of their skin. These lawyers rightly recognize that judging is not mechanical. It's shaped by worldview, by identity, and experience. And it's easy to see, therefore, why they would resort to the strategies that they think would resonate best. But the cost of this strategy is that it allows courts to resolve cases while ever confronting their racial context. And it compounds, such that over time, we've all helped create this constitutional jurisprudence that's blind to race. And because race isn't present, we never get to have constitutional doctrine that understands that the color of your skin matters in how you walk this world. Now again, want to be fair, we have to recognize the limitations that lawyers face. Public defenders, civil rights litigators are up against systemic hostility and are often forced to work with scarce resources. I think, therefore, it would be a mistake to think that the failure to litigate race is a failure of courage. Rather, I think it's better to understand it as part of a larger pathological system. But in this moment, strategy cannot be an excuse for silence. We need a new model of lawyering one that tells the full truth, even when courts might not want to hear it. We need a model of lawyering that centers race rather than editing it out. We need a model of lawyering that follows community demands and not just doctrinal logics. Now, at this point, you might ask, well, if the courts are hostile, if the doctrines are flawed, and if racial arguments are rejected, why keep litigating race at all? And I think the answer has to be that silence is not neutrality, it's complicity. Now, I am fully aware of this moment of racial retrenchment we're living in right now. I have the terrible habit of watching the news compulsively, waiting for the next bad headline. And in this climate, it's tempting for lawyers and advocates to pull back, to frame cases and causes more narrowly, to speak more cautiously, to scrub race from our legal arguments, then from our websites, and then from our vocabulary, all in the hope that we can survive this moment. But we can't be deterred in our fight for racial equality. If anything, this moment needs to strengthen our resolve, because retreat is not strategy, and invisibility will never lead to justice. If we stop litigating race, if we stop naming the ways that racism operates in policing and in other areas of life, we allow courts to continue to pretend that discrimination is an exception and not the rule. We give those who would oppress us cover to continue on as if it's business as usual. Litigating race isn't just about winning the case in front of you. It's about shaping the legal and historical record. It's about educating the judge, the press, and the public. It's about making it harder for those in power to look away. And sometimes history surprises us. Now, sometimes those surprises are bad, but sometimes they're good. What seems politically impossible in one decade becomes legal precedent the next. And that only happens because people kept pressing, kept building the foundation for the future, kept laying the groundwork for the good opinion that will eventually come, even if the current moment is bleak. So yes, I understand that litigating race will be difficult in this moment, but it's more necessary than ever before. So what can we do? Well, obviously there's no single fix to this really, really, really big problem. Here are some thoughts that I have on some potential paths forward. So we need to reimagine the Constitution. This means first, naming the problem. Racialized policing is not a side effect or a glitch. It's a predictable outcome of the legal doctrines that ignore race. That requires lawyers doing better. We have to raise race in our motions, in our briefs, and in our arguments. We must tell the stories of our clients in full, race and all. We must resist the pressure to sanitize our advocacy for the sake of palatability. It demands that we work to diversify the profession. That means more lawyers and judges, especially at the highest levels, who understand what racial bias looks, and importantly, what racial bias feels like. We need doctrinal reform. We need courts that allow for race-conscious interpretations of the Constitution. We have to stop pretending that there's such a thing as a reasonable person who doesn't have a race, because there's no raceless person in the United States of America. We also have to start thinking beyond the federal Constitution and the federal courts. State constitutions and state courts can be powerful tools for justice. Many state constitutions contain stronger privacy and due process protections than our federal constitutional baseline, and we need to use them. We should file claims in state court and push for state-level precedent that reflects the realities of all communities, including those that are marginalized. We must litigate strategically choosing cases that highlight racial injustice, and then push courts to engage with it directly. For the lawyers in the room, we must support, listen to, and work directly with community organizers and leaders. Real change begins outside of the courtroom, and the legal profession has a lot to learn from grassroots movements, and we have to be open to that education. Lawyers have to treat the clients that they serve not as passive recipients of legal help, but as true partners and vital knowledge holders. And we always have to remember that the law is one front in a much broader struggle and look beyond the courts. And to that end, we can push our elected representatives to restrict and reshape police powers directly, because most police policy is shaped at the local level. We can harness our collective power by electing law enforcement officials that reflect our priorities, which means voting for the sheriff, the Commonwealth attorney, the local judge. But voting is just the first step, because we need to hold them accountable. And that means showing up at town halls, requesting meetings, serving on accountability boards, because it's this type of local power wielding that can actualize the largest amount of change over the day-to-day of policing. Staying local, we can demand our cities and our states to ban pretextual stops, to require written consent for searches, and invest in alternative response systems that do not involve armed police. We can push local governments to require transparency in the form of data collection, so we know the numbers of stops, frisks, arrests, uses of force, and that data is broken down by race. We can urge our elected officials to support and fund community-led safety initiatives that reduce contact between police and community members, and we can fight to end qualified immunity. And finally, we need to change the narrative, recognizing that legal reform will never be enough. We have to stop conflating public safety with policing. We have to challenge the idea that more law enforcement equals more justice. We have to amplify the voices of those closest to the problem, because communities know what they need better than any judge or lawyer ever will. And we need to reshape how we talk about justice. Too often, the legal system treats justice as a conclusion, some kind of verdict, a sentence, a ruling. But in truth, justice is a process. It's how we treat people along the way. It's whether we see their full humanity. It's whether we're willing to listen, to believe, and to care. The work of justice is not just done in the courtroom. It's taught in our classrooms, it's fought for in the streets, and it's built in community spaces that prioritize the dignity of everyone. So to wrap, I wanted to lift up the work of a scholar who I've been thinking about a lot lately, the late, great Professor Derek Bell, a founding father of critical race theory. Before Bell helped form critical race theory, which, by the way, is needed more now than ever before, Professor Bell was a civil rights lawyer who worked on school desegregation cases in the wake of Brown versus Board of Education. And after he hung up his briefcase and stopped litigating, Professor Bell spent his academic career examining how racism operates in the law, not just as bias or bad policy, but as a structural force embedded in the very doctrines and institutions that many will claim as neutral. Professor Bell challenged the idea that the law is steadily marching towards justice. He saw how the courts could betray the very people they're charged with protecting, and yet Professor Bell never stopped fighting, because he believed that the struggle in and of itself has value, that even when the odds are long, even when victory is uncertain, there is power, dignity, and meaning in resistance. That is the kind of resolve we need now. not naive optimism, not blind faith in the courts or the laws, but a deep, grounded, unshakable commitment to fight for justice, even when the systems all around us resist it. The Constitution isn't self-executing. Its promises mean nothing unless we fight for them. We all have a say in what the Constitution means. Lawyers have the power to shape how those promises are interpreted. Judges have the power to breathe life into those promises or let them die on the page. And we, the people, have the power to make sure those in power live up to our constitutional ideals as they should be, not just as they are now. Resistance isn't about just what we oppose, it's about what we build. Every legal brief that centers truth, every classroom that teaches students to connect doctrine to real-world experiences, every community member who demands transparency and reimagines safety, that is resistance. And we can resist the erasure, we can tell the truth, and we can teach our students, guide our clients, and shape our community so that justice isn't just an aspiration, but eventually, hopefully, justice is an expectation. And again, you just have to take one look around this room to realize that you aren't alone in that fight, that we are a part of a community. And that matters more than anything, because community is not only how we survive, community is how we win. So let's be clear-eyed about the law's failures, but not cynical about our power to transform it. Let's not just demand equality in theory, but make sure it shows up in action. And let's work together relentlessly to build a legal system that serves, respects, and protects us all. Thank you.
Professor Baker and I had the privilege and honor of presenting this year's Darrell T. Owens Community Service Award to Ms. Tamika Palmer. I'm just going to offer a few introductory remarks about the award, and then Professor Baker will introduce a worthy recipient of this award, Tamika Palmer. This award is in honor of Darrell T. Owens. He was a great civil rights activist, state representative. He broke many barriers. He was a judge. He was the first African-American commissioner in Louisville. He served as a Kentucky Attorney General, first African-American to do that, Jefferson County Commissioner, and as a former NAACP legal defense president here in Louisville. He was a prominent worker on criminal justice issues and made many, many contributions. And he was a graduate of Howard University School of Law. Walk by his picture all the time. Yes. I want to recognize the family of Darrell T. Owens. Mrs. Owens was not could not make it, but I just want to introduce or recognize the family of Darrell T. Owens. Here. And now I'll leave it to Professor Baker to introduce our award recipient.
Thank you, Professor Powell. When you hear the name Breonna Taylor, different visions may cross each of our minds. For some, we see her in her EMT uniform at her graduation. Others see her in her blue jean outfit next to her brand new Dodge Charger. Some of us lawyers may see her in her all-white outfit standing at 6th and Main in front of the Louisville Bar Association building. And then how can we forget the formidable Oprah magazine cover, or even the beautiful painting of Breonna in the Tiffany blue draped dress by Amy Sherald, which is the work that made the Breonna Taylor Fellowship here at the University of Louisville possible. What we all can agree on is that Breonna Taylor is synonymous with movement. While many of us were, and still are, filled with passion in this movement, what happens when the catalyst for that movement calls you mom? Mom is faced with the position of not being able to grieve in peace. Mom is forced to share her firstborn with the world. Mom is forced to put on a brave face each day. Mom has to relive her tragedy each day. Mom is forced to take on an entire system, and while she has supporters, she still feels so alone. But Mom turned that tragedy into purpose. Mom fights each day to ensure that her daughter's death is not in vain. Mom goes to each and every hearing, each and every day of trial. Mom shows up when politicians call her for support to ban no-knock warrants throughout this country. Mom fights. But I think sometimes the world forgets that she is still a mom who is grieving. A mom who wakes up each day hoping that it is another day closer to justice. A mom whose heart skips a beat every time the Department of Justice victim notification system sends an email, or when the prosecutor sends a text asking if she's available for a call. In a system of letdowns, sometimes I know, because I get that front row view, that each time we get those calls or text messages, Mom is expecting disappointment. And how I wish I could tell her and be truthful that disappointment won't come, but unfortunately I don't have the ability to do that. But having that front row seat has given me the opportunity to see just how strong, how resilient, how resourceful, how caring, and how realistic Tamika Palmer, the mother of Breonna Taylor, is. That front row seat has shown me just how much she's grown, how truthful she is when she says that her goal is to make sure that no other mother has to wake up to the call she received on March 13th, 2020. She puts in the work, she worries in silence, but most of all, she continues to fight for justice for Breonna Taylor. The kind of fight that only a mother of a movement can truly understand. It is for her journey, her growth, her sacrifice, and her fight that Tamika Palmer is being honored with the Durrell T. Owens Community Service Award tonight, and I know that Representative Owens would be extremely honored to know that she is bestowed with this honor in his name. And so will you all please join me in bringing Tamika L. Palmer, this year's Durrell T. Owens Community Service Award recipient, to the stage.
Professor McNeil. Here.
When she got here, she said, "How long do I have to talk?" I said, "Oh, however long you want." But she is going to share a few words with us.
Excuse me. I hate talking. First of all, just thank you to the Owens family Thank you to U of L. Thank you to so many people. I can't even start naming people because then you get in trouble. Um, Breonna, to the world, she was my 26-year-old daughter, but for me, she was my world for 26 years. So much of what I know I learned through being her mother. So it was a huge job to protect both my children. And to get that call was just, I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But I know that I wouldn't be here without so many of all of you. It's crazy. I wish my mother could see me get an award for the thing I got in trouble most of my life for, fighting. So that's crazy to me, right? But I don't know a better reason to fight for. I don't know a better person to do it for. I mean, not that I wouldn't have done it for Janai, but my point is that she was my whole world for 26 years. She was my firstborn, and she was my first love, my first best friend. She was my world, and it took a lot of people to understand that, and just a lot of people to help me fight. So for me, it's the People's Award, but I'll take it home and keep it for us. So I'm just eternally grateful to everybody who's ever been a part of uplifting Breonna's story, and not just what happened to her, just her as a person, and to understand that she didn't deserve what happened to her, and to know that if it was any one of us, she would be here fighting just as hard. And I truly hope she knows. I just truly hope she knows that how much she's missed, and that, everything we do, we continue to do for her, and that for people to do right by her. So thank you.
Breonna Taylor's legacy lives on. Now we have Dr. Laura McNeil to present the Breonna Taylor Social Justice Fellows.
Good evening. So we were so excited about this award that we did not give our gift, we're so rude, to our esteemed speaker. So I'm going to give the microphone back to Professor Powell. And if our, I'm so embarrassed. If you could please come back up, I'll let you say a few words and I'll give him the gift. Thank you.
That's a nice way of saying it's all my fault. I'll take responsibility. Well, it was an honor to hear Professor Harara's remarks. You know that he's a brilliant scholar, and I think that this is an appropriate forum for him. He's worked so hard to be not only a scholar, but a movement lawyer. So we wanted to give him a small token of our appreciation for him to come and make this impactful presentation here today. Thank you so much.
It's okay.
Okay, now is the last part of our program, actually, before our closing remarks, is the presentation of this year's amazing fellows. So this fellowship was established in 2022, as our dean mentioned, through the generous gift endowment from artist Amy Sherald. This fellowship is presented annually to law students who will participate in restorative legal work over the summer for the purpose of empowering and equipping them with the tools and knowledge to go out into the world and work towards making substantive change with a particular emphasis on the criminal legal system. And so this year's fellows, I'm really excited because they just happen to be two students that are currently in my classes. That's never happened. and they were selected based on a rigorous and competitive process. So we are so proud of them. I'm going to embarrass them and have them come up on stage while we share some thoughts. We have a video that we're going to highlight, but I'd like them to come up. How often do you get your moment in the spotlight? Edison Pleasance and Addison Rogers. So we have a short video just showing and really encompassing, embodying what they hope to achieve as Breonna Taylor 2025 Fellows. And the video will play shortly. As a African American woman from West Louisville, I am absolutely honored to have this moment, have this fellowship, because it would allow me to first honor the legacy of Breonna Taylor as a West Louisville resident and a Black woman. Um, I understand how the situation that happened with her could happen to any of us, and she was one of the sole reasons I decided to pursue law school. So giving this fellowship means the absolute world to me.
It's an honor to be selected as a fellow and represent the legacy of Breonna Taylor. I was a college student in 2020, and was incredibly empowered at the community coming together for a social justice cause. But it's easy to forget what happened and to be compliant in society. And as the fellow, it's my goal to bear witness to injustice and fight for social justice and continue that through my legal career. During my fellowship, I'm going to be working at a public defender's office that lacks a lot of resources. So I hope to bear witness and become familiar with the system and its faults, but also bring a unique perspective as a person involved with restorative justice to bring those techniques to the community and assist those most in need. But most importantly, start to work um, in unique ways against the system, uh, bringing different perspectives and mechanisms beyond our punitive mechanism of law.
I would like to accomplish and learn how to alleviate implicit bias and discrimination from our everyday life. Again, as a Black woman, I know that is one of the contributing factors as to our hiring, as to if we get fired, if our everyday life, our healthcare, our education is surrounded by stereotypes surrounding Black women. And I will be working at the Reception Institute, which does research on implicit bias, particularly in discrimination, and applies those to different areas such as education, healthcare. And I'm excited just to do research and see how that shapes our world, our criminal justice system. So this fellowship will give me an opportunity to work towards add knowledge towards my future career as a lawyer in the community.
Important to celebrate the legacy of Breonna Taylor so we don't become complicit in the system of injustice and we don't forget the unfairness and that systemic racism that surrounds us. As a law student and a person with these educational resources and privilege, it's important for me to celebrate the legacy of others, but also recognize the important work and continue that work. Through opportunities like this fellowship, I'm given unique stance and perspective to continue to work and to continue to use that privilege to uh, help others who might be in the system and not given other opportunities, or who might be lost and unheard and unrepresented.
It is beyond important to celebrate the legacy of Breonna Taylor because that situation could have happened to any individual, any Black woman in Louisville, Kentucky. Growing up in West Louisville, particularly, every day you see injustices occur to our youth. Um, and I came to that realization quickly that it could happen to even me. I want to continue to say her name, Breonna Taylor. Just because she has passed does not mean that she is not around, that her spirit is not still here, and that it should not give me particularly the motivation to keep going through law school, And yeah, that's why Breonna Taylor's legacy is everything to me. Another round of applause for So they're going to speak just very briefly, just sharing their excitement about the fellowship and and kind of their plans. We'll have Edison Pleasance and then Addison Rogers, and then we will have our closing remarks from Professor Powell.
Yes. I'm doing a happy dance because obviously when I was awarded, not the cameras in the back, period. I like that. I'm sorry. So when I was awarded this, like, genuinely, I cried, I screamed, because the sole reason I went to law school is because of Breonna Taylor. If anybody knows me, I have a bachelor in fine arts with a focus in graphic design. I did not think I would ever be a lawyer. I would not think I would be in this position because I did not care. I was like, I'm just gonna be a graphic designer and live my life, period. You see the outfit, it gives arty. But upon her death, and also just the injustices that occur in West Louisville, I got tired of seeing the same thing over and over again. And the only way to have change in our world is through people of color like us joining the legal field. So one day I'm gonna run for mayor. Be on the lookout, be on the lookout. But again, thank y'all for being here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for inspiring me, both of y'all. Y'all are iconic. I follow both of y'all, and y'all are just great people. Thank you. Bye. Sorry.
I want to echo Edison and her wonderful speech, and thank everyone for being here, especially the family and what you represent. I come from Western Kentucky, and we often don't have opportunities or communities that I have found here in Louisville Law School. But what I think is most important is what our wonderful speaker said today about movement and how we can empower one another in a field. Law school gives us the tools, but it doesn't equip us with the power and encouragement and knowledge used to fight the system. And so that's what I look forward to doing, and thank U of L and Brandeis School of Law for supporting that journey.
Thank you so much. You can see why we're so excited. They are on fire, to put it mildly. So, Professor Powell, if you don't mind coming up and giving us closing remarks.
Thank you all for being here. This has been a great evening, an evening where we celebrate the achievements of the Brandeis School of Law, saving our democracy, empowering change through activism, the brilliant remarks of Professor Harara, and where we started off with the First Amendment. Saving our democracy through activism is quite important. We must keep the fight alive by first educating our students so that they have the critical tools to engage. And that means in the classroom, engaging them with the reality of our situation, to understand and unpack and give them the tools that they desperately need in order to be social justice engineers, borrowing from Howard. Addison Pleasance and Addison Rogers, congratulations on the Breonna Taylor Justice Fellowship. Your work will enliven, advance, and reify the strong public service and public interest tradition of our law school. It's really the graduates of our law school who really advanced that mission. We're quite fortunate to be connected to that legacy. And we must ensure that that legacy of empowerment provides light in this time of erasure. Thank you so much for everyone for coming. Keep the fight alive, and thank you very much for your commitment to activism, social justice, and creative inclusivity. Thank you. There's a reception immediately following.